Good morning, everybody. Welcome to TLDC. I'm sorry for being a minute late. So Valerie and I chit chat problem, which is all good to have. So just letting you guys know, we had a guest today this morning, Aldine Simmons, and her daughter is sick, so she's not going to be able to make it. We hope that her daughter gets well very quickly. But so today you have us. So you have Toddi and you have Valerie in the window. We're going to actually talk a little bit about some of the same topics that we were going to discuss earlier today, or today for our topic, which is gender equality and pay. And so, I think both of us actually have a lot to talk about on this, and I'm sure our chat group does as well. I'm looking. Craig is pretending trombone sounds. He's so funny. Hey, Craig. Just to tell you a little bit too, because and Valerie and I have chatted a little bit in the past, and so the two of us will actually be doing some moderation of the WILD panel, Women in Learning and Development, for TLDC 19. So we're really excited about that. So we're kind of starting to kind of refine some of the things that we'll be talking about. We have guests who have topics on their platter, and that they will be discussing. And additionally, we will be doing some other events around that. TBD, just letting you know, we're planning some cool stuff. So what we found is that the two of us have lots to talk about, so much so that we can't pay attention to the clock.
Well, it's wild. It's wild, right? I want to call it wild coffee and cocktails.
I love that. I love that.
Today's coffee and cocktail day. So I've got my reusable, because I reuse my Starbucks. So I'm going to give them.
Very good.
But if you want to make a cocktail, Bloody Mary or something, just make sure you make enough virtually for us.
This morning it's coffee, because I don't think I should have a cocktail this early. I think that would not be a good idea for the cast.
But please go ahead, other people. Make what you like, and make sure you put an umbrella in it.
There you go. Well, there's coffee with whiskey. All right. So we diverge. Anyway, welcome everyone. Ellen says make it strong. So essentially we're going to march forward. We're just going to kind of introduce a topic that quite frankly could take days to talk about. Our original topic today was talking about gender equality and pay in workplaces and as consultants and in many of the other roles that we have. So Valerie actually has some really great data. So I'm going to go ahead and let her get started with that, because I know she's been doing some reading and researching on this, and I'll jump in as appropriate. But like I said, between the two of us, we could fill hours and hours.
And everybody in the chat. So
exactly.
What's nice is, it'll give us an opportunity for me to really focus on the chat. And this is everybody's webcast. So I'm not really, on Twitter, I'm not really that into Twitter. LinkedIn,
gotcha.
LinkedIn,
yeah. Valerie's definitely.
And I'm putting together a website. But enough about me. I want to first say that this is a no sorry zone, so I don't want to see any sorries in the chat if anybody talks over one another, or Toddi and I do that. This is a no sorry zone unless you've done something really bad. Then So, and like Toddi said, I think that this topic really, there's a lot of areas I'd like to kind of really get deep in. And I think that might be something we can do later on, maybe in 2019. But I did come across this, and I was going to kind of talk a little bit with Aldine about this, and I'll kind of show it to everybody. I don't know if anybody gets this magazine. It's actually free. Training Industry magazine. So they put out every year, and I always hang on to this because I use this as leverage in my job. If I feel I'm getting underpaid, I use this as my statistics, though, we don't always know, right, Toddi, how, it's kind of a biased. Oh, thank you for doing that, Craig. Kind of a biased
thank you.
Research. But I do want to kind of focus in on women, but I want to talk overall that one of the things they mentioned in this magazine was that average trainer salaries overall jumped more than 5%. So the kind of average is 88,174. So if your salary is not 88,174, you get this magazine and you march to your manager's office. But they do a lot of really breaking things down by region, executive salary, training salary by numbers of employee trained. And then there's a section which is salaries by gender. I don't know if you can see that, but what I did was I kind of, and if you, everybody in the chat, if there's certain ones you want me to pull out, I'm happy to do that. But I focused really on 3 that really had the biggest gap between male and female. And that was an IT training manager. So the average salary for a female is $69,755. And for a male, it's $133,321.
Holy cow. Wow.
And we're not,
Oh
I
my
don't know
gosh.
if these include bonuses, because I think that's a whole other issue that people have found. There's a pay gap between male and female in base salary, but also in bonuses. I mean, there's a huge gap in bonuses. So, Toddi, what do you think about if I just kind of each introduce these, and maybe we can have a discussion around each one of those roles? So, is anybody
we
out
also have questions. We have questions in our question poll too that are preloaded, and feel free to ask additional questions. We'll try to get through those, even if we end up doing kind of a speed round at the end. But yeah, totally.
Yeah. And what I do want to do is kind of discuss this, because I think it's good to vent and discuss this and go, what the? But I also think we can talk about what are some ways we can mitigate this? Because there's one of these that I think people do have control over. I think we have control over all of these, really, but maybe kind of as a group generate some of those solutions too, how we can work through this. So
yeah, that's the hard part. How do you work through it? How do you make that situation better?
Right. And I think technology, many of us know that's a heavily male field, and there are a lot of issues with women in the IT industry in kind of higher roles. Though I do find this interesting. I did find information that within the technical, and I'm using the word education, kind of across the lines through corporate and the learning, separate education sector, there are quite a few women in executive kind of positions, which is interesting. So I don't know what you have seen, Toddi, or any of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, I where I'm at, I feel very fortunate because we do have a number of women executives. I don't know that I've ever done any kind of study to see how many women versus men we have, but I'm actually in a chain of command that is really all women, all the way from the top down, which is really interesting. So, I think we're probably kind of an anomaly. And, to the credit of the folks that I work for, they've done some really cool studies to look at, level setting pay, level setting skill sets, really determining, what the criteria should be for the competency for each of the roles.
Right.
But that's not always the case, and so I think that there are steps that industries can take. There are some really great consulting companies out there that can really go in and, over a course of a year or so, take a look, where you are as far as your pay structure, as far as, your makeup of your workforce, so, the skill sets that are behind those to be able to, and I hate to see standardized, but, you have to standardize on, job roles and job titles and things like that. But there are definitely some really great consulting companies out there that can do that. Of course.
Actually, I worked for one. Yeah, I worked for one at Mercer. Yeah. That's one of the big things we did was the compensation surveys.
Yeah.
But as you're talking, as your
tools are available.
Yeah. As you're talking too, I'm kind of going off in another offshoot, but even pay, it's such a secret. It's like you go to work and you're told you can't talk about it. And why can't I talk about it? I don't know. And I would like to hear if anybody in the chat works for a business where pay is a little bit more transparent.
That's a really good question.
And so you almost feel like with that, a company knows they have something. I guess I'm talking about I don't know, C-suite, whoever makes those big decisions, the man, the man, the woman, why that is, such a big thing. And Rick, you said you work for the state, so they have to, the government, they have to kind of have that accessible. Have you seen, Rick, a difference between male and female pay? See if he kind of answers that, but
and keep in mind too, if anybody does want to join us on the screen, that's fine. Let me know, and I can send you an invite. You can jump in with us.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, state and federal level, both of those have to be more transparent. If you're say a GS-13 or something, in the government, then, what that pay structure looks like. You also know what the criteria is. My husband works with a lot of folks who are, government service GS level people. And so, there is a very stringent standard as far as the expectation for the competency and the skill set that somebody will have before they're even allowed to interview for a job or for a role, and they have to demonstrate that and prove it. And years ago, I actually applied for a GS job, and I remember having to provide pay statements for my current job to prove that what I was making. I know,
that's
weird,
crazy.
huh?
Why do I have?
Yeah,
but strange. You know what? I think with anything, it's not always black and white. There are other layers involved in it, and so we're talking about women across the board. We can get even deeper and talk about women of color, women of certain races, Hispanic women. And again, my apologies, because we did this kind of on the fly. I don't have the data with me, but I have done a lot of reading. Historically, make less than white and black women. So you've got these layers of inequality based on race.
Yeah, the disparity is really interesting. Yeah, and you also mentioned something earlier when we were chatting, because we were chatting a lot. We're talking, corporate industry specific, but there's other places where there is a disparity in pay for women. And you mentioned consulting. So, that's a thought. I mean, most of us, I think, don't really even know where to begin if we're not already consulting about where to structure our pay and how to do that ask. So maybe that's something we should go ahead and discuss too.
But one thing, before we get into that before I forget, I do want to because I know we have a lot of instructional designers, so you'll be kind of relieved to see that that these pay is pretty much there's parity in that. So for an instructional designer, the average pay for a female is $74,312, and for a male it's $79,442. So it's a little bit better. It's not that huge gap, but where I did see this big gap when we talked about this was consulting. And this is something in consulting you have complete control over. So we wanted to maybe talk about that a little bit more, what your rate is. So this I was really surprised by. So for a consultant, for female, $96,229. For a male, $192,202.
Wow. Again, crazy difference.
So I think I know some of the reasons why, but I'd like to kind of discuss why we think there is that gap between what women are pricing themselves out at and what men are pricing themselves out at. What are some of the things behind that? And Toddi, maybe you have some thoughts, or people in the chat have some thoughts, or.
Well, so, this might kind of relate to one of the questions we have in there. Should I really negotiate my pay if I'm trying to get my foot in the door? And I think that goes, either within, industry or corporations, or even to consulting. Because sometimes and this has been my experience, because, I have let my husband have, the kind of the top dog position in the family as far as the job, because he's an engineer. He was military. And, when you're military and you marry somebody in the military, there's no choice about whether you put their career first. The government's going to tell you to do that. So I've always been in that weird position where, if I go out to consult, and I have consulted a couple different times full time in my lifetime, should I negotiate just to get that contract? Should I negotiate to get that job? And I think just, kind of as a role, as women, we're used to having to kind of negotiate. I mean, it's different. I mean, it really is. Most of the time, because of the way our culture is with the primary parent, we learn to negotiate. We learn how to settle things and how to get people to talk to one another. Trust me, if you ever had kids, you know how to do that. It's not necessarily a skill you come in with, but, just working either with, your family members to get everyone to get on the same page, to get coordinated, to work together. I think it becomes sort of an innate skill set amongst women to basically work on, how do I negotiate things out so it works for everybody? And that mentality flows into, I think, in what we do with our pay. Because I know I have actively engaged in the past with discussions ahead of time before consulting with somebody and given them a lot of information that they probably should have been paying me for. I've had that happen a couple different times. On the way into negotiating my contract with them, so I'm negotiating, I'm giving, I'm taking, and it's sort of that mentality that should I always be willing to give and take. Tracy had a really interesting comment, by the way, in the chat. She says if a company is unwilling to negotiate higher pay, but is still within her range, and I think we all have a kind of a range there in mind, she negotiates for 2 to 4 weeks more PTO. And most companies, she said, will give that without blinking. And I think that's important. And I think it depends on what we find to be of value. What is most valuable to you if you're negotiating with a corporation, if you're negotiating with a client, I don't know. I mean, it's all a trade-off. So,
and I've
anyway,
kind of just informally mentored women who've been negotiating salaries, and I've had women, and again, all ages. So it's not an age discrimination like younger women, it's difficult, or older women. And she was a younger woman, and she said, well, I'm thinking of negotiating this amount. Do you think it's okay? And I said, most definitely. But you go in there armed. You don't just say, can I please have, no, you go in there armed. You say, I have a master's degree or whatever. You go in there with what Tracy said. Sometimes I've noticed that the data is a little bit outdated on sometimes government sites, but you can still go into, and again, take it with a grain of salt, like salary.com or something like that. And you can at least kind of gather some information. So you are going in there confident. And I think she was going to negotiate a couple $1,000s. And believe me, that company can afford a couple $1,000s. So I said, try it. And if a company's going to say to you no, then would you really want to work for that company? I think we give organizations and the world of work too much power over us. I really do. And we don't go in there confident and knowing what we can give. It is bargaining. A lot of it is bargaining. And then Craig said, I think it's complicated by the fact the L&D industry doesn't have defined titles. Yes. And I think,
well, it's one of our issues, and
that's where I think you have to be armed with more information. So, talk the language of that company. So, I've worked in data-driven, I don't know, I'm just throwing out all the, acronyms and such, but be able to talk the language of that company, be able to pull out those significant things that you have done that would be, of value to that company. So, I hate that feeling of, please give me more money. I mean, that is just ridiculous because the companies, organizations aren't always in the driver's seat. I think we're in the driver's seat a lot more than we think we are.
Well, and here's a weird thing too. So, I know that a lot of companies, and I've been in the world of work for a few years. When it comes time for pay raises, they have a defined amount, that you could be eligible for, and that becomes part of their, how they manage, at the C-suite level or the executive level, and that's been true across the board for almost everyone that I work for. You go through your entire performance evaluation, you need to get a rank and stack kind of thing, which I'm not sure. I definitely don't agree with how those are done, because I think you tend to miss the people who necessarily aren't, the extroverts. High performers sometimes don't get noticed when they're a little bit quieter. And so that, becomes kind of a thing where you're really only eligible for a certain amount. And so this is my experience, is that I have found that sometimes exiting where I'm at and moving on to the next role has given me a lot more leverage, because that, what the skill set I bring to the table for the next organization I work for, is at a point where I can negotiate better than I might have been able to do in my last role. And so, I worked for a very large defense contractor in Massachusetts for years. And I remember one of my managers telling me at performance evaluation time, he's like, you know what, I'm giving you this rating, but on the stack rankings that we're doing, he said, that doesn't put you in the category for the next step up. And he said, I'd like to see you get there, but by the rules, I can. he was an amazing manager. And, basically he said to me, and, this was kind of colloquial because he said, "Hey kid, I think your best option is to find your next step, and it's not here." Um, and, I actually really liked working for this man. He was a retired Navy commander, actually. And, but he had sort of a kind of a, hoorah male mentality, but he treated me extremely well. And I never felt like there was any gender gap within our organization. I was logistics specialist, the same as everybody else. I had, commensurate pay, the same as everybody else. But that was probably one of the most interesting pieces of advice that I've had in my career, is that the best way that I might move forward is to move out.
Right. And sometimes it might be
So,
worth it too, to negotiate a title. I worked for one company that was so
mm-hmm,
title driven, very hierarchical company. And
mm-hmm,
instead of giving raises, they give you a title. So yeah, it might have
right,
seemed
right.
like, okay, this is weird, but then you've got the title, so you can take the title someplace else. So it looks like you've had,
Well,
kind of a progression, so you can look at it that way. But I
mm-hmm,
think, kind
mm-hmm.
of getting back to, kind of the consulting piece, that then that means that people are setting their own fees. So, why are women not setting those higher, fees? And so I'm in a coaching program, and a lot of the class, they're women, and I've heard a lot of women say, "I don't know if I'm worth that much. I don't know."
Oh,
And right. And so, but I think as a culture, sometimes we've been taught that, we
wow,
watch our
that's it.
mothers. My mother, she would serve the family dinner first, and then she would eat.
Right,
So there's
right.
those kind of subtle things that, we put ourselves. So we are to blame sometimes
Mm-hmm,
for some of those things. We put ourselves in that position. So I think as
right.
women, we need to be more responsible and, take some of these things into our own
Mm-hmm.
hands. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, you make a really bad point though, to walk in armed with information. So I know in our cast, we talk about these things um, in the daily webcast. So we also have the Slack channel, and for a while, and if any of you don't know about our Slack channel, be sure, and Craig, I bet you have the link for it. Join our channel, because we have these kinds of discussions in there about, what we think our consulting rates should be set out. We had a conversation, it was a side conversation you have to actually ask to join, but, about consulting, and about, thank you, Craig, thanks for posting that, how to start in as a consultant, or if you're a current consultant, we gather some data. We don't have anything final or formalized. That's something we might want to move towards, is maybe formalizing some of our salary data, but getting an idea of what some other people were doing in our industry. And granted, we are a very loose industry, because
Hmm.
we don't necessarily have a standard for titles, or for what we need to have a title, but we do have those discussions, and I would encourage everybody to engage there too. And just, if you're willing to share with us, keep in mind that anything you put out there, just, that's confidential. That's our own kind of a personal Slack channel.
Or
I
give
know
a
I've
range
shared some
or
of the rates
something.
that I
Yeah.
charge. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Or ranges. Ranges are always good too. But it's kind of interesting, because, amongst ourselves, we can just make those, inroads to talking to each other, to find out kind of where everybody is, and level set from there too.
but
Um,
we see kind of a trend of more women kind of lowball themselves. But I think, as
mhm,
generally,
mhm,
many of us do, because we give, again, organizations more power than they really should
mhm,
have over
mhm.
us. With kind of,
Right.
now we're kind of getting into career a little bit, but with our careers. And really, you're
Mhm.
the captain of your own ship. So you can determine if you're going to go elsewhere, if you're going to become a consultant. Yes, it might not be easy,
Mhm.
but you can determine your own rates. It's not the easiest thing always
Yeah.
to shift things, but you have that. I think
Yeah.
that's what's so important. And as women,
Mhm.
we see some of these things, and I think it's good that we see them, but we take those individually, and we can negotiate those things. And
Right.
again,
Well,
I'm
and
just kind of saying this off the top of my head because I don't have the statistic, but I believe that I've seen statistically more women end up going on to higher education and have degrees than men. And again, that's please don't ever think, men in the webcast, that I'm downing you or anything, because I think that this is a concern for all of us. So I'm not saying that we're better or anything, but that's a leverage tool as well.
Yeah, and it's a parity issue amongst people with certain skill sets, certain degrees. I know I've worked for organizations that are completely, very just degree snobbish.
Pedigree.
And
they
if
call
you
them pedigrees. They do.
Credentials. I love the word credentials.
Oh, they call them pedigree where I worked.
But that disparity can exist in many different places. We have some extraordinarily talented people among this group who may not have that master's level education. And so, I've had that exact same experience that, you can't apply for this job because you don't have the master's. I'm like, well, okay, now I'm working on it. Trust me, I'm really working on it. And it's been exhausting me to do this and work full time. But again, what steps can we take? Well, and what choices do we have? Did I really need the master's in order to start to get to the level where I can look for work as a consultant? Do I need the master's to get the level of work in my company? I don't think it hurts, but did I really need it? There are times in my program, my own program that I'm doing for a master's, I think I could be teaching this because I have this experience. Not to say anything bad about my professors. I've gotten so many great connections, and I've learned a lot along the way. But so many of the topics I already know really well.
Well, plus I think that so my master's is now outdated. Mm-hmm. What I learned a number of years ago, before the industry really took a huge shift into really becoming more tech heavy. So now I can use it just as saying I have one, but I can't rely, I can rely on the theory, but I can't rely on a lot of the storyboarding things, because storyboarding and all of the tools have become outmoded.
Right. So, right. Definitely. Yeah. Okay. So Craig's good at making sure we go back to our questions. Okay. So here's the really super valid question. How do I successfully prepare? We've talked a little bit. We've said arm yourself with information. But how do we really put ourselves in the mindset to negotiate what we're really worth? Not what we think we're worth, not what somebody else thinks we're worth, but what we're worth. And if you really look at it from like an economics perspective, having that information and knowing what others are making is part of that data research. How do we do this? How do we go in and prepare to negotiate? What are some of the things we need to think about first? Well, and I have a feeling you may have some ideas.
Well, I'm probably, because I'm going to be a coach, so I'm probably a little biased at that, but really there are people out there who do coaching in that area. So if you feel that that's a skill, or maybe you need a little bit of help, I'm one of these people. I love collaborating and talking to people, because they can lift me up and give me some ideas I might not have had. So that may be an opportunity to seek out a career coach or somebody, or a negotiation coach. I mean, there's all these different niches of people who do different things. So, and kind of get some thoughts from them. And you could even practice your negotiating. I mean, if you're really serious about utilizing that skill, if you're going into where you're going to be using that a lot. So that is a suggestion I have, is going to a coach. And I think it's being armed with information. When we're not prepared and we don't have information most of the time, we don't feel confident. And I think it's having conversations with other people, people that we trust, who are in our industry, getting their stories, their, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and really understanding our potential company or the company we work for, what the language is. What do they value? What is valued at that company you're at? And if you don't have that, how can you get that? Or how can you articulate you have that or will get that? Those are some of the thoughts I have.
So would you recommend, and I know I've done this in the past, literally sitting down and doing an exercise to write down your accomplishments? And I say I've done this in the past, and I haven't done it recently. But if you can really kind of look at the culture of your company, or maybe the culture of the people you consult with, and what they value, I think it's worthwhile to sit down and start to come up with some really finite things that you've accomplished, and have maybe a little bit of background about how you've done that, maybe the challenges that you faced in it, how you overcame those challenges. To me, that's part of the stories. How did you overcome the challenges to getting to that point where you made success that's valuable to the people you're
And
negotiating
own
with?
those accomplishments. I think a lot of times people don't own them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they either go off on to one end and call themselves ninjas and thought leaders, or they're off in the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't done much in my career. I haven't. What I do is I keep a file folder that I say I'm a
Okay.
star.
Okay.
That's what I name it in my Outlook. And whenever I get
Love it.
any kind of email, anybody saying anything or anything, I use that as
Mm-hmm.
my leverage, and I put that into that folder right away before
Okay.
I forget. Um, and I
Okay.
think I think it's also looking at small things that we do. A lot of times we
Mm-hmm.
think of, I've got to get this big Tiffany award, that I can put on my desk
Mm-hmm.
to say
Mm-hmm.
that that's an accomplishment. No, there are
Right.
little inroads you can make every day that are huge accomplishments that lead to bigger things. So, um, those are huge, I think.
Right. But I think we should be documenting them. I mean, I think back to,
Absolutely.
the things that I did, specifically working as, a lead for an Army training program, the milestones, the deliveries that I delivered, the things that were done on time, the things that came in within budget or even under budget, I mean, and I know that sounds kind of, cliche to say those things, but to me, those are really important accomplishments. But nothing got delayed. That was within my control. You got to remember, sometimes not in your control. But I've made a point to write those. I have like a running list. I've done that in the past. Things that I've accomplished, and they might be my work accomplishments, and some of them might even be other accomplishments. And I know we talked earlier about, we both have a passion for small film, and on my list of accomplishments right now is that I've taken awards in for film festivals, for small, snippet documentary types of things. But to me, that's part of what I want to document to say, okay, I have that ability. It's cool.
Right, because
So.
you can transfer some of those things, those skills within that area to work. And again, I think that it could be something like, I think relationships are huge. If you are
Mm-hmm.
really like a SME whisperer, you've got that
Mm-hmm.
relationship down. That's another thing that's huge. I'm able to
Mm-hmm.
go across the organization, and I'm able to, get things accomplished with a variety of people. That's huge. I mean, and if that's valued in your organization, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
organizations are siloed, that's big too. So um, I think it's looking at what we do and realizing we probably do a lot more important things than we think we do. And it starts with us, like with anything, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you think you're not worth a lot, then that's how other people are kind of going to see you.
Well, that actually goes to a couple of our questions. So, one of the questions is, why do so many women have a money mindset issue? And I guess we're kind of generalizing on this, and we're taking it from our own perspective as women, that we do have that money mindset issue. But I do think we have that issue. Why do we have
Well,
that?
I think
Why?
a lot of, and this is one thing that I recommend, and I advise my daughter financially, be empowered financially. When you feel as a
Mm-hmm.
woman empowered financially, that really helps. And sometimes in our own life, we aren't empowered financially because,
Mm-hmm.
again, that tradition kind of comes through the culture that the man handles the money. The man brings home the bacon, the woman fries it. And you know, and
Boy, we're really dating ourselves,
but
aren't we?
yeah, I like that kind of old schooly. But those things still do seep in. And so at a very
Mm-hmm.
early age, I taught my daughter to be responsible with money, to save money,
Mm-hmm.
to go out
Mm-hmm.
there and look at the markets. Like, I don't call myself an
Right.
expert, but I learned from my mother. My mother was like ran our home like a business. She
Mm-hmm.
taught me a lot
Mm-hmm.
of things about going out, and she said, go out on Morningstar and look at the markets. And because
Right.
when you have money in the bank and you have money saved, I can guarantee that most people feel pretty empowered.
Right.
So I think when
Right.
it's taking control of those things. And I know money
Hmm.
and finance has so many things attached to it, but um,
It does.
yeah.
And I think often just because of time and the way things happen, sometimes, and not everybody lives in a couple relationship, but, my husband and I do. And, for the most part, and I say he pays the bills, but that's because he's the guy that's just scheduled everything, not necessarily that he actually does it. He's really great at automating. So that, it's like, it's nice because we're both so busy. We both literally live in Colorado Springs, commute to Denver, work crazy schedules there and drive back and forth. But he does that piece of it. But then I have to say, and I've had people tell me this, we actually really do manage our household like a business because we just don't have a choice because of the community, because of our schedules. I have a daily dog sitter who comes in, to take care of my dogs. I'm the one who pays her. We discuss money matters usually in the car if we have to on the way to work. But we do quite a bit of coordination that way. And, but to your point, as far as being empowered with money, I will tell you something that I did a few years ago that I think is really important is I got my own financial advisor,
Hmm.
to help me handle some of my own personal retirement concerns. And not that I don't communicate those with my husband, not that that's not a coordinated plan, but it certainly gave me a feeling of, and by the way, she's a woman, of course, which is really cool. But we discuss things, I think, in a different way, and that's part of it is because we may have different concerns about our money and about how we're investing and how we're doing things than maybe we would in our whole relationship. So I actually have conversations with her a couple times a year on my own, which I think is, it's kind of that coaching thing. I look at it as almost a coaching type of relationship, and so maybe those are the things we need to be doing for ourselves is empowering ourselves with someone who can help us manage our money decisions. And so that's where, to your point, a career coach could be really valuable. That's someone who is outside of our family relationship who can look at us in a way that maybe we don't see ourselves and
Or
to
a
help guide
mentor.
us to say,
We talk a lot about mentoring
exactly.
because not everybody
Yep.
can afford that. We know that. And that's another thing I want to
Right.
mention. So obviously I'm a little bit older, so I'm going to kind of see things from my perspective, but I try to, see from a lot of different perspective, but I'd love to get if there's younger women, some perspective because things do change, if they're finding kind of some of these same things with finances. So,
Hmm.
that may
Hmm.
be different too, and people from different cultures that
Right.
different. So we're
And
kind
I,
of
would-
talking
and I'd
from
like
our
to,
world.
yeah. Well, I mean, what other perspective are we going to bring to the table? And this is something I think is important though, is it might be expensive, and sometimes it can be expensive, but you can also limit your engagements, and find value in, engaging with someone for perhaps two or three conversations. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long-term kind of thing.
Right.
And I belong to groups, you belong to groups. I belong to mastermind groups. I have a podcasting group that I belong to here in the Springs, and I don't engage with them all the time. But the value that I find in the one or two times that I do engage with them are really important. And the same can be true with a career coach. You can approach someone and say, "Hey, I'd like to engage with you for just 3 sessions. Just so that I can figure out how to, negotiate my next pay raise. It's coming up on the end of the year. That's, that's a thing. We need to think about that. Let me kind of help you understand where I am and where I'd like to be. And, it's like I work a lot with moving projects forward, moving projects, from a current state to a future state. And so I tend to look at like everything in my life as here's current state, here's future state. What's my timeline look like? What do my milestones look like? And how am I
Yeah,
going
you
to
treat
get
it like a
there? So
project. Um, a
absolutely.
lot of times you have to treat that and put a plan together for yourself. And of course, it doesn't have to be
Mhm.
overly
Mhm.
structured. It could be a small plan, small goals.
Yep.
But yeah, and I've done
Yep.
career advising and I do coaching and I have my own coach. I just
Mhm.
met with her yesterday. So, and it's just nice to get
Awesome.
those perspectives and to have that person also just kind of talk through some things with you. And
Mhm.
there's never
Mhm.
been a time I haven't been inspired to move forward
Right.
um, because of that session with her. So for me, it's very much. I think it's worth the money that I pay. But there's other
Right. Exactly.
opportunities you can find as well. So,
Yeah, and I pay for some of my opportunities as well. And the rationale behind that is you've got skin in the game when you're paying for something,
yeah.
Because you want to make sure you get your money's worth. So I mean, that's one thought on how we can kind of move forward in negotiating. Craig had a really interesting question in there as well. I think it was Craig. Are we finding disparities not just between pay? Are we also finding them between the actual roles themselves? Like where somebody fits within the org chart, what their duties are. I mean, are we finding that to be the case? Do you have any insights on that?
Um, Actually, I'm looking for somebody who's a CLO of an organization to come talk to one of our
Mm-hmm.
future wild chats, and I'm hoping that
Okay.
um, once I find her, she'll be able to kind of talk to that. I don't really have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
experience, kind of in somebody who's moved through the learning into that
Sure.
role,
Sure.
that I can kind of address. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
anybody in the chat has something or you do.
Well, I mean, I've had both experiences for
Okay.
sure. I mean, I worked in a very highly male-dominated field, working as the lead trainer for an Army program. I had no idea what I was getting into when I jumped into this. But, I know people have heard me talk about my years working, with an Army training program for robotics, and I always say that if you're really lucky, you get one really great opportunity. And that was certainly an incredible opportunity for me. That, by the way, came from my previous boss saying to me, you know what, you probably need to go outside to get your next best
Right.
opportunity. He was absolutely right. And it actually didn't take very long. I put the feelers out there, and the next thing I knew, I had someone coming to me saying, hey, we see you've been leading some training initiatives on the Army and the Marine programs. Could we get you in to come in as the lead on this project as a sub to another defense contractor? And I never gave it a second thought. I just said yes. And knowing that at that point I really understood, instructional design concepts really well, but didn't know the Army way of doing things. I said yes anyway because I figured I was going to learn, and trust
See,
me,
I
I really
love
learned.
that. An
It,
opportunity presented itself and you just said yes. And that's sometimes what we have to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I learned along the way. I walked into the point where the project where the design docs were just being built for an online delivery for kind of a precursor learning for actually running these robots hands on. So I walked in when all the design documents were being put together. So immediately I had to understand the standards of what they call TRADOC 350 -70, which is basically an
Oh, I
Army
know that.
training standard. Yep,
Oh, I'm familiar with that.
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a lot of people are, but it's a
Fake
learned
it till you
thing, and
make it.
it's well, and I so being a military spouse, I definitely had heard about it in
Yeah.
my previous work, but I actually hadn't implemented a system, using these standards, and it's kind of like a version of ADDIE, just slightly different.
Yeah.
They call it a systems approach, you know, to to instructional design, and so I just went with it, and lucky for me, I had an entire team full of PhDs in instructional design to guide me to say, hey, yeah, that doesn't quite meet what we were expecting. So, our failures are where we really learn. And, going into this, I mean, I was, I'm not kidding you, one of 5 women in a team of 170 people. So every time we had a major, design review, there might be 2 women sitting in the group of, 50 men. But I never felt in a disparity there, honestly. I mean, because I always felt like I was well respected for what I knew and what I understood, and I was very technical. And so, every now and then you get that really dream opportunity to jump in. And so I did not feel like my role was different. I was a team of one managing all of the tasking for the development of this particular online piece that was also to accompany the instructor-led pieces that we set up. But never felt like, hey, go get me a cup of coffee because you're the woman in the group. That just never happened.
That's happened
However,
to
I have
me.
worked for organizations,
Yeah.
yeah, and it has happened to me in other organizations as well, where, the women in the group are the ones that are tasked with doing, developing, the events. We're the event planners. I've had that happen a couple different times in my life, and including, before I worked in defense. I worked for a medical device company that was kind of it. It's like, hey, we're going to do this real cool training session, and can you schedule all the food? Yeah. So I've actually had that happen.
Yeah.
But I've seen both. So I don't think, I don't even know how to say what drives that culture. Whether the culture says, okay, you're the woman, please get the food, or you are the respected expert in instructional design and trade act 350-70.
Were they both
and
kind of
we're going to defer to
organizations? And I
both
think
of
it
them.
depends too on the like manufacturing sometimes tends to be heavily hierarchical. So, for instance,
And this,
Boeing,
but I wrote,
Boeing is very old school.
that's who I worked under, by the way.
Boeing?
And that's that Boeing. I worked under them and my contract,
Yeah, it
and
depends
they
on.
were amazing to me, seriously. So
That's good.
we might have that mindset that that's how they are, but I was never treated like I was in
But
a
that's
role that was a
important
woman's role.
that you gave it a chance. And I think sometimes
Yeah.
we hear that some places this way, and then we say, oh, I don't want to go there. But, and again, that's taking opportunities. And sometimes we're like, well, I don't know if I want to, and just trying something. And if you don't like it, you're not there for life. You can leave.
Right.
And so again, I think I keep going back to this, but it's kind of giving our power away to an organization. And we kind of have to take that back. And that's not just even for women, I think, just people in general. And not allowing, them to kind of be all important.
Yeah,
and ask
definitely.
for things. As long as you have your data to back it up. And if they're going to fire you over something, do you want to work there? That's what I keep saying.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Is that a place you want to be?
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. I think sometimes you find out more about the culture of an organization when you get to that point where you're actually looking to move up or move on, or to do something different. So those are kind of the clues that I think we get, with respect to what we're doing. I'm just seeing some more information in here. Dominica actually posted that she had a couple of things she mentioned on salaries, that $90K for instructional designers in a tech company comes from the video. So I guess she's feeding us with some data, which is really interesting.
I love what,
and so,
I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Christian said about affinity groups. Yes, those are amazing. We had one at Mercer. We had a number of them, professional women's, and actually we had an LGBTQ group, because there's a whole other segment that, we can get into that, but having a professional women's network within work is great, because you can share some of those things across departments.
Yeah, and then actually the affinity groups are so important. If you have the opportunity to start one in your organization, it can be very empowering. And I have not been able to do that, because typically our affinity groups were engineering focused, and that does happen. The project management groups, or the engineering groups. My husband actually runs an affinity group in his organization, and shame on me, I haven't taken it upon myself to create an affinity group where I'm at. Or where I've been in the past. And I think that's something we can do. Actually, Dominica mentioned that the video she's referenced is a Khan Academy video, and that it has some interesting statistics, which is interesting, because I've met Saul Khan, by the way, and some of the fun work that I've done as a consultant. I got to actually meet him at one point.
Well, this is, you can
probably, Craig's giving us our 10-minute warning.
Yeah, for this one, you probably can go on the website for, and you can either get the magazine. I like having it in paper, but you can get a paper or free online.
Definitely.
So you can get that as well. But
yeah, and I would highly recommend them. And so just thinking about where we can gather some of this data. There are government statistics, there are government websites. I know at some point Sam had posted some information. Everybody I think knows Sam Rogers. He had posted some information that had some government data. I'll see if I can go back and find that. I can post it in the Slack, on salaries for different areas within L&D, kind of broken down. And I'll go back and see if I can find that and actually make a posting today.
eLearning Guild does have that, but I think that you are limited unless you are a member to all of it,
Right.
whereas this is kind of
Okay.
free information out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I could be wrong, and I'm wrong a lot, so I'll admit it.
And I know,
But
well,
if anybody
me
knows,
too.
yeah.
Well, there's other tools out there too. I mean, like LinkedIn will do a salary review with you. I mean, it's kind of a free tool if you want to go ahead and input your title, which of course, as we mentioned before, some of us, our titles are not standardized
Department of
enough to
Labor
actually be
is
able to
another
research.
Department of Labor site, but again, be mindful that some of those are a little bit outdated, but that's another
Mm-hmm.
source. So it's just another thing you can add to your negotiation toolkit by looking at
Right.
some of those things.
Well, and I think we should not be afraid to share some of that data too, because I know on the LinkedIn tool, they ask you specifically and they tell you that it's protected information, but you can tell them what your current salary is. So,
Yeah.
you can tell them what your salary is in your particular organization. And I know that they probably, they have a database where they collect it and they can come back and say what the average salary is for the organization you're in. I know I've actually done that a couple of different. Thank you, Craig, for the link on that LinkedIn.com salary. Because that is pretty current information. If someone's willing to share that with LinkedIn, I know a lot of people don't like to share that kind of thing, but it'll give you some information. Say I work for General Electric or another big company, they probably do have a lot of statistics, so they can come back and tell you that an average manager in this company makes this average salary. I mean, that's at
Yeah.
least a starting point.
And Deborah
You
mentioned
should always have,
Glassdoor.
yeah,
Glassdoor, so
Glassdoor as
those are
well.
submitted by actual employees. So that's good to kind of
By
add
user.
that to and see if there's a trend in what you're seeing. I see we don't
Yeah,
have much time left. If I could just
yeah,
kind of interject here. I'm going to put
awesome.
my email here, and I wanted to mention to everybody, and I'm just kind of formulating this now, and this is kind of, I'm starting it aside from TLDC, but I'm going to start along with Tadawon, who kind of came up with this idea, and I'm just going to call it a governance group for now, where we can get together as a small group and share projects that we are currently working on. So it's going to be very confidential. So you're really sharing work that you're working on now. And then as a group of other professionals, we can collaborate and you can get feedback on your projects. So if you're interested in being part of this group, I'm looking again, I don't know times, dates, but I would do it via Zoom. And I do have some people already interested, but if you're interested, send me an
Wonderful.
email just to kind of get on that. I'm going to start a spreadsheet and working through this so I put some structure to it. But I think it's a
Right.
great opportunity because a lot of times many of us work by ourselves or it's hard to get feedback from other
Yeah.
people who do the same thing. And we do need another set of eyes. And it's a really good, I want to create a really good, safe space to do that. And then also I wanted to thank everybody for kind of for being with us these past few sessions. We're creating as we go along. I'm hoping next year we can have a little more structure around this. I want to have a lead-in music and more interaction. So starting to kind of have more interaction from the chat and putting things up on the screen and really
Yep.
doing a
Yeah.
lot of collaboration. So we're working towards that with the wild sessions. And again, if you have any ideas, this is your cast, it's not ours. I've been kind of coming up with some of what I think could be good topics. If you have any ideas, put them in the Slack channel or send me an
Yes,
email.
definitely.
Toddi, do you want to put your email in there or are you
Yeah.
open to that too?
Yeah. I'm totally
I've been
fine with
kind of
that.
driving it, but we'll bring in people and um,
Yeah. Be prepared for great chats too. I have to say, I mean, Valerie's done some really cool things to engage with others in the group, and she's been very generous with her time.
yeah, I love
And
it.
I too would love to see this become a little bit more structured. And I'm with you. And we both have crazy schedules, but the feedback from the group about the things that are really important to them is important to us because we do want to make this about women in learning and development, not just the two that you see on the screen here. We want it to be about, and we'd like to have men as part of this group because we cannot be bolstered to be empowered
Yeah, and I
without the
don't
men that are
ever want
behind us.
people to
So
feel
yeah,
that they are not, what they do isn't important or aren't important. And I thank you for kind of walking through this kind of beginning of the journey with us, because it's been a little bumpy. And I don't know if I can promise, but Toddi and I will work very hard to put a little more structure around this, and really, I want to talk about hard things that we can't do. We talk other places.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and there's a lot of excitement behind this. So good. I will say that, one thing we bring to the table is we bring a lot of enthusiasm, and we bring a lot of, good ideas, which, we want to bounce off of others. And we also bring a willingness to learn from our failures and the things that we do and don't do wrong, So, definitely, and anybody who wants to send an email,
and give us feedback. Give us feedback.
Yeah, please, definitely.
I mean, that's how I think feedback is a gift, because that's how I get better, is through feedback. Just don't put any swear words in there, please. Here's a woman comment. Be nice. Be nice.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'll end on this. I worked for a company, and they were like, well, many are acronym filled, but this particular company was just like crazy acronym. One of their acronyms was SWAN. So SWAN. And this was an HR, outsourcing company. And you know what SWAN stood for? Smart worker and nice.
Oh, geez.
So you're a SWAN. You're a smart worker, and you're nice. And that is like so HRE.
That's so funny. That's hilarious. I promise not to use that.
Oh, you've been such a swan today. All of you are such swans. Now go ahead, fly off.
Oh, too funny. Well, I guess we'll get towards wrapping up. We got about a minute and a half left. So thank you again all for, indulging us in our chat today. Like I said, if you really want to see, kind of how we're working together, one of our challenges is that we probably get going and we get too excited. So, but that's a good problem to have. And so we're hoping that, some of the others in the group will join us in this excitement. And as we kind of formulate women in learning and development, which is wild, we want to have your input. So anyway, we'll get ready to sign off. Everybody have a fantastic day. And we'll be back again next month. And again, give us your feedback. We really appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for those great things. Thank you, Christiane. I see you put some other things in there. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, be sure and go back through the chat or put it into, the Slack team too.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday. See you in 2019.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.